मॉर्निंग एट क्लास हमने फ्रैक्शन चैप्टर करा था, उसको आज हम डीजी क्लास में करेंगे बेटा। और आप अच्छे से अपना काम कर रहे हैं ना सभी? ओके बेटा, टेक केयर। ओके बेटा, अब इसे जरा ध्यान से देखना सभी। डीजी क्लास में फ्रैक्शन फ्रैक्शन क्या होता है बेटा, देखिए।
The bike on the left is slipping and falling all the time. The bike on the right is finding it tough to move. Can you guess why? Take another example. A block is sliding down a rough, inclined plane. After going down 3/4 of the way, it abruptly stops. There is a force called friction, which causes these funny effects which you observe. Friction is defined as the force that opposes an applied force when two surfaces are in contact. As you have seen, friction behaves differently in different types of surfaces. Now, is the frictional force the same on all types of surfaces? Let's use a spring balance to measure this force and find an answer to our question. We will measure the force that is required to pull a block of wood over 3 different surfaces. You are pulling the block on a rough surface. What does the spring balance read? 500 Newton. Let's change the surface to wooden. Now the spring balance is showing 400 Newton to make the block move. And what does it take to move the block on an oily surface? Just 250 Newton. You can see from the results that more force is required to pull the block over a rough surface. The force of friction is greater on a rough surface because of irregularities on the surface. Friction is different on different surfaces. Also, there are different kinds of friction. See this man pulling a load with a spring balance. To start the movement of the load, the force required is 500 Newton. After it starts moving, the man just needs to exert 400 Newton to keep the load moving. The force required to overcome friction at the instant an object starts moving from rest is called static friction. The force required to keep the object moving is called sliding friction. Coming back to the bike slipping and falling on a wet surface incident. What's the reason? It's because of low friction. So you find friction has its uses. Without friction, you can't walk. You can't write. You can't hold on to things. Without friction, our daily life is difficult. Friction is also a nuisance because it changes kinetic energy into heat, which is usually wasted. Friction tends to cause wear and tear at the surfaces, resulting in damage and accidents. In some instances, we need to increase friction and in some to reduce it. There are ways to do this. We want to increase friction on tires, so we make grooves on them. For getting a better hold on a smooth object, we roughen the surface that will come in contact with it. Similarly, there are ways to reduce friction. For example, adding oil or grease to machine, sprinkling boric powder on carom boards, inserting ball bearings and fans, or using low-friction material like Teflon. Now, why do we insert ball bearings on fans? It's because frictional resistance for a rolling body is less than for a sliding body. Resistance to motion of a rolling body is called rolling friction. Did you know? The frictional force exerted by fluids is known as drag. The shapes of planes and rockets are specially designed to reduce friction when in air.
ओके बेटा, फ्रिक्शन क्या है? जब आप किसी चीज़ को चलते चलते किसी भी चीज़ पे या कोई ऑब्जेक्ट भी चलते चलते रुक जाता है, वो फ्रिक्शन की वजह से ही रुकता है। कई बार हमें फ्रिक्शन को इंक्रीज करना पड़ता है, कई बार हमें डिक्रीज करना पड़ता है। जैसे कैरम बोर्ड अगर हम खेलते हैं तो उसमें फ्रिक्शन इंक्रीज करते हैं, नहीं, उसमें फ्रिक्शन को हम डिक्रीज करेंगे ताकि ईजिली वो मूव हो सके। और मशीन्स हैं उसमें फ्रिक्शन रिड्यूस करेंगे, इंक्रीज कर देंगे ताकि मशीन्स अच्छे से चलेगी। पर हम अपने शूज़ जो हैं उसमें डिज़ाइंस बनते हैं टायर्स में ताकि फ्रिक्शन को इंक्रीज करा चाहे आप इजीली उस पर वॉक कर सकें। फ्रिक्शन से ही आप आसानी से चल सकते हैं, आसानी से आप लिख सकते हैं। ओके बेटा। Friction and its type.
Why did the plate come to rest before reaching the boy? Why did the goalkeeper miss the goal? Why did the stationary car suddenly start moving down the road? All these actions occurred due to the presence of friction. Let's learn more about friction and its types.
What is friction?
Friction is formally defined as a resistive force that acts between two bodies in contact and in relative motion with each other. Why do surfaces in contact experience friction? The surfaces of all objects, irrespective of how smooth they may seem, have irregularities on them called peaks and valleys. Even a mirror has surface irregularities. Hence, when two surfaces come in contact with each other, their contact points fuse to produce a frictional force. Frictional force always acts in the opposite direction of motion, thus opposing the motion of the moving object. Why is it so difficult to shift a heavy cupboard? Why isn't this boy sliding down? The answer is static friction.
Static friction is the frictional force experienced by objects at rest. When an object is at rest, the irregularities of the two surfaces interlock to prevent the object from moving. The objects can be set in motion only when an external force overcomes static friction. After overcoming static friction, an object is set in motion. While in motion, an object is subjected to a different type of friction called dynamic or kinetic friction. The boy applied a tremendous amount of effort to move the cupboard. However, once it started moving, the effort required to keep it moving seems much less. What is the reason for this difference in effort? Kinetic friction between two surfaces is always less than their static friction. Once an object starts moving, the contact points on the two surfaces do not get enough time to fuse with each other. Kinetic friction varies in accordance with the type of motion.
When a moving object slides over another object, the type of friction between the two is called sliding friction. The striking of a match, the rubbing of palms, the shifting of the box, children playing on slides are all examples of sliding friction. Another type of kinetic friction is called rolling friction. When an object rolls on the surface of another, the friction between the two is called rolling friction. For a given object, rolling friction is always less than sliding friction. When you roll an object, the surface area in contact with the floor is much less than the surface area in contact with the floor while sliding the object. Vehicles, a ball rolling on the ground, and a drum being rolled are a few examples of rolling friction. While swimming, you have to apply a certain amount of force in order to move ahead. Aeroplane engines use energy to travel through air. This force or energy is used to overcome the friction encountered while moving through air or water. As gases and liquids are known as fluids in science, this type of friction is called fluid friction or viscosity. Fluid friction is the friction experienced when an object moves through gases or liquids. Fluid friction is also called drag. Do you know the reason behind the specific shapes of aeroplanes and ships? Birds and fish are always moving in fluids. Their bodies are specially designed to comfortably overcome fluid friction. Aeroplanes are hence designed to emulate the shape of a flying bird. Ships have streamlined bodies like those of fishes. Even cars are shaped to reduce drag on them. Swimming caps worn by swimmers also help in reducing fluid friction, thus helping the swimmer move faster.
Type of friction, static friction, kinetic friction, sliding friction, rolling and fluid friction बेटा. ये टाइप ऑफ फ्रिक्शंस हैं। टाइप ऑफ फ्रिक्शंस आपके कौन से हैं? स्टैटिक फ्रिक्शन, काइनेटिक फ्रिक्शन, स्लाइडिंग फ्रिक्शन, रोलिंग एंड फ्लूइड फ्रिक्शन। ओके बेटा, टाइप ऑफ अ फ्रिक्शंस। ओके बेटा, फ्रिक्शंस के बारे में देखा, टाइप ऑफ फ्रिक्शंस के बारे में जाना हमने। तो आज के लिए इतना ही। नेक्स्ट क्लास में नेक्स्ट चैप्टर करेंगे। सो टेक केयर, बी स्टे एट होम, बाय ऑल ऑफ यू बेटा।